私の名前レゼ。
この子好きになっちまう。
ボン。
Hey, what's up guys, Andre here. So today I wanted to talk about Chainsaw Man the movie, Reze Arc. Now, I'm not sure when this video is coming out. Hopefully it's still in theaters. I mean, Demon Slayer stayed in theaters in my area for like 3 months, which these days is crazy for any movie, much less an anime movie. If Chainsaw Man stays in theaters for even a quarter of that time, I think that'd be pretty cool. I ended up seeing Chainsaw Man 3 times as of this recording, once in IMAX, once in 3D, and once with D-Box seats, so I also want to talk about my experience with those. I assume most people who are watching this video have by now already seen the movie, but just in case you specifically, and I mean you specifically haven't, we'll talk non-spoilers first, and then I want to get into some spoilers later, but I'll of course alert you before I make that transition. That said, if you're interested in the Reze movie, you should know that it takes place after season 1 of Chainsaw Man, so I'm gonna assume that all of you have already at least seen season 1. Chainsaw Man the movie Reze Arc picks up exactly where season 1 left off and finds Denji still simping after Makima until he meets a girl named Reze, who takes a liking to him, and Denji being Denji, he of course also takes a liking to her. Unfortunately, this is Chainsaw Man, not a romance anime, so Denji's first ever age-appropriate relationship with a normal human girl is unfortunately upended by the arrival of the Bomb Devil. So if you've read the manga, it's a pretty faithful adaptation of the Reze Arc with some extended scenes and extra anime original moments here and there. But all the changes and additions feel very natural, smart, and or just plain fun, like the much extended battle scenes. Speaking of which, the main draw to this movie are absolutely the visuals. Director Tatsuya Yoshihara and his team at MAPPA gave everything to this adaptation of Chainsaw Man, and it's genuinely one of the best looking anime films of the decade because of it. The whole second half of the movie especially is just one insane adrenaline rush of some of the very best action animation and direction I've ever seen. The film overall features bold colors, loose line work, experimental animation styles, and an overall design language that feels faithful to Tatsuki Fujimoto's art style in the manga, as well as his colorful chapter and volume covers, yet is still just as, if not more cinematic than season 1. This movie is just so fun to look at. All due respect to season 1, it was an absolute achievement for TV animation, and I think the bold creative choice to go for a more muted, realistic tone and cinematic style was extremely valid. I mean, Tatsuki Fujimoto, the creator of the original manga, is a cinephile, but I would argue that his manga takes just as much advantage of the unique characteristics of the illustration and comic mediums as it borrows from the cinematic medium. So I do feel like this more stylized, but still very cinematic approach is the Chainsaw Man adaptation I was dreaming of seeing 3 years ago. Not to mention I thought we would actually see the Reze Arc animated 2 or 3 years ago. The design of the Bomb Devil has been talked about and fan-arted about for 6 years now since its reveal in the manga, and it's still like one of the coolest villain designs of all time, and the film brilliantly brings it to life. Literally every shot with the Bomb Devil is just so freaking cool. I also want to call out the amazing sound design and music of the Reze movie. Let's start with the music. I've said before on this channel I'm not the biggest Kenshi Yonezu fan, and I don't care too much for Kickback to be honest, but Iris Out is a damn good song and a perfect opener for this movie. And the end credit song is Jane Doe, which is a duet between Kenshi Yonezu and Utada freaking Hikaru, which is insane as both an Evangelion fan and a Kingdom Hearts fan. Beautiful song and a perfect closer for the movie. As far as the OST goes, Kensuke Ushio has been very busy these days, pulled between his work on Chainsaw Man, Dan Naoko Yamada's projects, Orb, and the highly rated film Cocoon, which I still gotta check out. I love Kensuke Ushio's music for Naoko Yamada's films like Liz and the Bluebird and A Silent Voice. I think he's amazing at the subtle ambient stuff, the wistful stuff, and some of the big emotional songs. I think he just captures the vibe of Naoko Yamada's work so perfectly. And I think his Dan score actually is amazing for capturing that series' chaotic and offbeat nature, but I have to admit, I wasn't over the moon for a soundtrack for Chainsaw Man Season 1. It worked just fine, but I don't know, it didn't blow me away. But with the Reze movie, I think he found a direction for Chainsaw Man that worked really well and actually clicked for me for the most part. Fittingly, a recurring theme of the Reze soundtrack seems to be sudden change or polar opposites. Tracks like Silly Walk and Sweet Danger fascinatingly mix completely opposite tones together to create some really great aural and narrative effects, especially Sweet Danger. I think that track just works so beautifully in the scene that it's in. There's also In the Pool and In the Sea, which are just gorgeous and sweeping, classically cinematic, romantic songs. Many of the tracks just perfectly and wholeheartedly capture the innocence and butterflies in your stomach feelings of a first love, like the track First Glance. And of course, this is all well within Kensuke Ushio's wheelhouse with his previous slice of lifey works. He even managed to sneak in a silent voice-esque deafened piano track in a scene. Where I think the soundtrack feels maybe a tad less effective is in some of the action scenes towards the end of the movie. Don't get me wrong, I think most of the music for the first half of that big battle is amazing, and the tracks only get better and better as the battle gets crazier and crazier, but I feel like they sort of reach a plateau at a certain point and stop gaining intensity and hype to match the visuals. They also use an extended version of the Maximum the Hormone insert song Hawatari ni Okusenchi from season 1, and it's awesome and starts at a great place, but it gets a little awkward because the scene it's in ends up having a bunch of dialogue, so it's kind of hard to hear parts of the song. That being said, all these little nitpicks I have with the music in this film lessened a lot on my second and especially third watches. Overall, I think the soundtrack is amazing and some of Kensuke Ushio's best work. But speaking of explosions, look, in a movie about a bomb monster, you'd better hope it has some great sound design and Foley work, and this movie really does. I love the sound of the bomb devil's snap, her sparks. Obviously, all the different explosions and chainsaw sound effects are great. I also got a kick out of the cartoon sound effects they sometimes use for comedic effect. That's another thing. This is a funny movie, and with a large crowd receptive to its humor, it's a riot. The first screening I went to was with a packed audience, many cosplayers, including my group, and they all laughed at every joke and it made the experience that much better. The second screening I went to had a very small, quiet audience, which of course was nice in ways, but also not as fun sometimes. The voice performances were also fantastic in this film. I watched the Japanese dub with English subtitles. The core cast from season 1 continue their great work from season 1. Kikunosuke Toya as Denji and Tomori Kusunoki as Makima were both fantastic. Oh, how I missed Ai Fairuza's power. But I think the standout from the original cast this time around was Sakata Shogo as Aki. I think he was really great in this film. And it's funny because now that he's going to be Johnny Joestar, we now have two JoJo protagonists in the Hayakawa household in Chainsaw Man. Natsuki Anai is also very funny and very lovable as Beam. Natsuki Anai is having a great year in theaters, by the way. But the standout new performance in this movie is obviously Reina Ueda as Reze. To be honest, I wasn't sure about her voice at first. I read the manga 4 years ago, back in 2021, so I've been familiar with the character of Reze for a long time, and I frankly didn't imagine her having such a sweet, cute voice. But after seeing the film, I can't imagine a more perfect voice for her. She is supposed to be sweet and cute, but to a degree that feels almost false, almost performative, or at the very least hiding some kind of darkness or sadness behind it. And Reina Ueda literally breathed life into that nuance of Reze's character in ways that I was totally not expecting. More on that in the spoiler section. Let's talk about the story a little bit. Again, no spoilers yet. As I said earlier, I read the manga 4 years ago, back in 2021, in anticipation of season 1 coming out the following year. So I'll admit it's a bit hard for me to review the story itself as if it's fresh to me, when I've been familiar with it for almost half a decade. What I will say though is that back in 2022, when I was telling people how good Chainsaw Man was and that they should totally check out the anime when it comes out, I I said that not knowing at the time that we wouldn't be getting the Reze Arc animated until 3 years later. Because the Reze Arc is when Chainsaw Man starts being good. I mean, look, yes, everything covered in season 1 is good, but the Reze Arc is when I truly fell in love with the manga. It's the culmination of all of Denji's romantic and sexual exploits thus far, and the first time he's met someone other than Pochita who genuinely likes him and shows care for his well-being. You don't want to see that taken away from Denji, who's, someone who has had his childhood and normal life stolen from him since the moment he was born. Aki as well goes through an arc of his own over the course of this film in a B-plot, and we also get some pretty important moments for Makima and her character. And honestly, the Reze arc is not even my favorite arc from the manga. Arguably, the series only gets better and better with each arc after the Reze arc. So, anyway, if you liked season 1, you will love the Reze movie. If you thought season 1 was alright, maybe give the Reze movie a shot, it might change your opinion. I will also say for anyone worried that the story structure might not feel like a movie, this is not an Infinity Castle situation where they're only adapting like a third of a story arc or it just feels like a couple episodes stitched together. This story is, first off, self-contained. It adapts the entirety of the Reze story arc from the manga from beginning to end. And secondly, Tatsuki Fujimoto, being the cinephile that he is, wrote this arc in the manga with a movie's pacing and 3-act structure in mind from the get-go. So trust me, it's good, and it feels like it was always meant to be a movie. Anyway, here's my rating. I'm giving Chainsaw Man the movie Reze Arc 5 stars out of 5. I was kind of debating between 4.5 and 5, but screw it, I've seen this movie 3 times now, and I've been enjoying it more and more each time, and it's easily one of my favorite movies of the year. It's pretty much a perfect above and beyond adaptation of the Reze arc from the manga. It's exciting, it's super fun, but it's also genuinely pretty sad, so get your tissues ready. And look, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I'm gonna need you to listen to me. Don't bother resisting. This movie is a blast, it's the bomb, it will blow you away and keep you pinned to the edge of your seat, so Jane Doe to the theater, kick back and get your irises out because you don't want to miss out on this experience. Pun Devil out. Let's talk formats. This movie is available in a bunch of premium formats from IMAX to 3D to 4DX to ScreenX. IMAX or Cinemark XD are obviously great, it's just a big ass screen, so those are definitely worth seeing. Let's talk about 3D. So I saw the film in 3D on a standard size AMC theater screen. This was my second viewing of the movie. And I was very curious about this because I can't think of a time when an anime film has ever been released in US theaters in 3D. Maybe it's happened before, but I've never seen it. And I don't think I've ever seen a 2D animated film in general in 3D, so I was very curious what it would look like. And, well, you guys know those paper theater crafts you sometimes see in craft stores or bookstores? You know, where it's like a bunch of flat pieces of paper cut out and glued in layers to form a 3D-ish diorama. It kind of looked like that, with the different 2D elements of the screen separated onto different layers that will look either closer or further to you when you're wearing the 3D glasses. It was strange, especially for character close-ups where, for example, their hair, bangs would be on a separate layer above their face, but it worked well, giving depth for wide shots with foreground elements, for example. Transparent things like glass and water looked kind of cool. Fireworks looked nice. Also, the subtitles were always on their own separate layer. I will say the 3D effect, or maybe just the novelty of the 3D effect, seemed to wear off over the course of the film, and I stopped noticing it after a while. So, all in all, it's a fun novelty, especially if you've never seen a 2D animation in 3D, but definitely not a must-watch in 3D. Now let's talk about D-Box, aka the rumbling seats. There's also 4DX, which I think is kind of the same thing, but with extra effects like water spray and scents, apparently. Before this, I had never seen any movie ever in a D-Box or 4DX seat, so I had no idea what to expect. And you know what? I'm gonna say D-Box, actually kind of worth it. It's actually a lot more detailed and specific in the movements it has than I thought it would be, because the seats don't just have different levels of vibration, they also shake and jerk and rock and shift a little bit. So for example, in like an explosion scene, the seat might jerk forward in the initial explosion, then rumble as the smoke clouds spread out and dissipate. So obviously the seats do a lot of stuff in the action scenes, but are pretty quiet during most of the non-action scenes. But they do use it for certain non-actiony effects. So, you can feel things like Denji's heart beating through your chair in a certain scene where you can hear his heart beating on the speakers. And when they play Iris Out in the opening, they also sync the vibrations to the beat of the music, which is kind of cool. If I were to compare it to like video game controllers, it's not quite as detailed as like a Switch 1's HD Rumble, but it's definitely more detailed than like a normal classic video game controller rumble. So unlike the 3D, I actually think this adds to the experience a little bit. I think it was pretty fun, especially the second half of the movie, and I'm sure 4DX would be even crazier. Okay, now let's talk spoilers. Spoiler warning, if you haven't seen the movie, get out of here. I don't care if you've read the manga already, if you haven't seen the movie, get out of here. Okay, I want to talk about the changing art styles first. I love the amount of experimentation that was in this movie. The opening scene of Denji's dream rendered in black and whites like the manga, the abstract stuff in the opening credits animation, Aki's future sight flashes, Angel's brief flashback, and of course the wild typhoon battle scene, which had a style that kind of reminded me of the Gear 5 stuff in One Piece. And I love how it ends with those splashes of color that mimic the manga's Volume 1 cover art. With all these different styles, it feels like they're really carrying forward the experimental philosophy of Season 1's endings, which is awesome. Speaking of the opening though, I do like that we got to see a part of Makima's morning routine. We got to see Aki's morning routine in Season 1, so that's a fun little addition to this movie. As a manga reader, I also think it's interesting that we're getting a look at Makima's home already. Something seems to be missing. I love the opening showing Denji and Aki having to drag Power unwillingly to see Makima. That was hilarious. As you all know, Power is basically absent from this movie, so it's nice that they found ways to add more of her in here. I also love that this film had such a strong color script. Like, certain scenes are absolutely drenched in red or blue or yellow. That's something Season 1 rarely went for, I think. A random observation, I think sometimes Reze's explosions have skull shapes in the smoke clouds, which is just a cute little detail. There is some interesting editing. I think maybe the coolest cut in the entire movie for me was when the girl drops her candied apple during the festival and it gets crushed, and that's a transition to Reze biting off Denji's tongue. That was such an awesome transition. The choice to have Reze running away from the knife guy on the school intercut with Denji's horny fantasies was a choice. I'm not sure I love that part. I think me and the audiences I saw the movie with were a bit confused whether or not we were supposed to laugh at that. Let's see, what else? The movie also has this recurring motif that I don't think is in the manga at all, of a plane flying overhead. So Reze sees a plane flying over the roof of the school after she kills the knife guy. And also on the beach, when Reze wakes up at the end, she sees another plane fly overhead. Maybe it's supposed to represent freedom, but I don't know, you'd think maybe a bird is a better symbol of that. The plane could also represent the opposite, surveillance, and Reze's fear of being watched and not being able to run away. Speaking of Reze, okay, so the ending is obviously really devastating. One thing I thought they might do in this adaptation is when Kishibe is explaining the Soviet folktale at the end of the movie and basically giving us Reze's backstory, I thought they might add an actual like young Reze flashback, or even just like a quick image, a flash of an image showing Reze as a young girl in the facility. I mean, Kishibe even says that pictures of the children were released in the news, so I thought they might give us that image, but maybe that would have been unnecessary. But there are like three subtle things that this movie does to make that ending extra sad anyway. So number one, on the beach when Reze seemingly goes to kiss Denji but breaks his neck instead, Mappa added in the moment where Reze gives him a hug first. And looking back, we know that that was a genuine hug, of course. And Mappa, that is cruel. Second thing they did to make this even more sad, having Reze do her exact walk cycle to the cafe with the exact shots repeated. I mean, that's the same as the manga, but what Mappa did was, at the end of it, they have her break out into a full, prolonged run full of hope and excitement to reunite with Denji, only to get trapped by Makima. And that is evil. And the third thing they did, in Reze's final moments, they fully confirmed with a shot reverse shot, a very classic cinematic tool, that Reze sees Denji through the cafe window as she's dying. I feel like in the manga it was slightly ambiguous whether she could actually see him. But no, in the movie they just fully say, no, she's seeing him right now and she's dying. And that is diabolical. But for some reason, it took me until my third watch of the movie for all of that to really hit me. Because as I saw Reze running down the alleyway on my third watch of this movie, I started to actually give it some thought as to what could have happened if Makima didn't show up. I started to imagine the life Denji and Reze could have had if they were able to reunite. I thought how they would have probably had to live their lives on the run anyway. It made me think of Bonnie and Clyde or Thelma and Louise, and how it almost definitely would have still ended in tragedy and probably be short-lived. But at least they would have had the chance to be together for at least one last time. And then I thought about that new illustration Tatsuki Fujimoto did of the two, and I just got so sad. I want to talk a little bit more about Reina Ueda's performance, because I think what really stood out to me watching the film was that the Bomb Devil's voice is Reze's voice. Now obviously, yeah, they're the same characters, so duh. But it still somehow caught me off guard the first time I heard it. Like, Reina Ueda doesn't change her voice at all. And I feel like hearing Reze's cute voice come out of such a scary looking character adds a lot more dimension to her character that obviously couldn't exactly be present in the manga. When you hear that voice, it's like a constant reminder, especially when you know Reze's backstory, that underneath that bomb devil exterior is a sweet teenage girl whose normal life was stolen to turn her into a child soldier for her country. Like Denji, she's a victim of this terrible society who not only fails its youth, but actively uses and abuses them. They're literally labeled as non-human and treated as such. For kids like her and Denji, a normal life is just a dream. And you know why she was so pissed off when the knife guy and Typhoon showed up at the school to try to kill her? Because they woke her up from her dream. Denji may be an idiot who falls for every girl he ever meets, but it's because of that personality that he was able to give Reze love and give her the chance to pretend to be a normal girl for a week. And even though it was all an act on her end, she gave him the same. Or maybe it wasn't all an act. I mean, when you hear Reze laughing during the final battle, doesn't it sound just like when she was playing in the pool with Denji? And I do think this movie is definitely worth rewatching, because once you know that Reze really liked him and maybe wanted to run away with him, every moment of their interactions in the first half of the movie becomes a question. Is she acting, or is she being genuine? At the school, when Reze learns about Denji having never gone to school and working as a devil hunter as a teenager instead, she has a grave expression. She can't help but feel sorry for him, but also feel a real connection with him. She's lost in thought at the school bathroom because she's considering her next move, to proceed with the mission or abandon it all to be with Denji. At the fireworks festival, when she asks Denji to run away with her, she's being genuine. She wants to run away with him, that is, until he essentially rejects her, and so she decides to proceed with the mission instead, and the whole battle begins. And I also believe on the beach, when Denji offers to run away with her even after all that happened, she actually considers it before she hugs him and breaks his neck. Then when she tells Denji, "You should wise up a little," she's also telling herself that. Anyway, those are my last thoughts on the movie. Sorry to end on a downer, but it is a sad movie at the end of the day. A really good, sad movie. And the funny thing is, the Reze arc in the manga never got me that emotional, but some of the later arcs very much do. So let's just say I don't think I'm gonna be okay when season 2 comes out. And I guess one last thing I appreciate about the movie is that they save the ending where Power shows up again for after the credits. So they kind of let us sit with that sad ending with the Hikaru Utada song for a few minutes before giving us one last laugh at the end. Another example of a good editing choice. But yeah, anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. This movie is really good. I'll probably go see it a 4th time. Let me know your thoughts on the movie in the comments, support the channel here, and have an awesome day.